I am going to start this deep dive by ripping the band-aid off. PhoenixPoint is... it's just awful. But it's also revolutionary and contains some of the most brilliant ideas I've ever seen in the genre. What a loaded start! Welcome back to my ongoing series on XCOM-likes. To understand this game, you have to understand that PhoenixPoint isn't just an XCOM-like, it is the XCOM-like. And to explain why, we have to talk about Julian Golob. In 1994, Golob created the video game UFO Enemy Unknown, also known as XCOM UFO Defense. At the time, it was an enormous success, widely considered one of the best games made. But after the 90s, the IP was sold off and Golob moved on to other tactical projects like Laser Squad Nemesis and Chaos Reborn. Fast forward to 2012. Firaxis Games reboots the franchise with XCOM Enemy Unknown. And it's, as you probably know, is a massive success. Julian Golob looked at the reboot and liked what he saw. However, he felt it had lost the granular simulation and the creeping dread of his 1994 original. He wanted a middle ground, a game with modern graphics and UI, but one that brought back the deep mechanics and obsessive management of the old school. And so, PhoenixPoint was born.
No matter the cost.
You can see the lineage immediately. It's a game literally created by the father of the original XCOM to reclaim the throne. But instead of green aliens invading from space, the narrative concept here is much grimmier. Climate change melts the permafrost, and an ancient nightmare called the Pandora virus leaks into the oceans, and it starts mutating. It turns sea life and humanity into horrific crab-squid hybrids. A terrifying mist rolls over the land, hiding the enemy and driving humanity insane. It is very Lovecraftian, and I loved the originality. It's also intriguing that the game doesn't start at the outbreak. We actually drop in 25 years after the apocalypse. The war is already over. Humanity lost. The few survivors left are huddled in isolated havens. It is a true post-apocalyptic setting. We take control of the Phoenix Project, a secret fail-safe organization meant to save the species, which sounds badass, until you learn that by the time crab monsters showed up, it was already defunct. Governments had stopped funding it, dismissing it as a paranoid relic of the Cold War. So when we boot up the game and take command of PhoenixPoint, the last operational base, we are broke. We are not in charge of the world. We have no boss, we have no funding. We are alone. And we are the desperate last resort trying to figure out the virus's origin while navigating the politics of 3 remaining human factions who absolutely hate each other. And these guys are total caricatures. You have the green, democratic utopians who just want peace and love in the middle of crab monster apocalypse. Then you have a militaristic technocratic cult run by a single dictator. If something happens to him, the whole faction collapses.
They said he had a plan, that he could lead us to victory.
And finally, the disciples of Anu, who literally worship the virus and want to mutate their bodies with it. They are all insane, and we are stuck in the middle. This whole story is told almost entirely through text. There are no character moments, no cinematic cutscenes, just text logs and research papers. At best, you get a few voice lines over a static image.
Tobias West may be clever and Synedrian may sound great, but only the Exalted is dealing with the world as it actually is.
There is no personal story here either. There's no one representing PhoenixPoint. There is no Bradford telling you what to do. There is no chief engineer making banter. We are just reading emails and autopsy reports. It is dry, lonely, and bureaucratic. And that is where the game starts showing its cracks. But we aren't here to discuss the story. Let's talk about the revolutionary stuff, the gameplay. The most notable system we need to cover, the feature that actually makes this game revolutionary, is the free aim system. There are no dice rolls, no hidden percentages, and no praying to RNGs here. Everything is simulated ballistics. What does it mean? So when you aim, you see two blue circles. The outer circle shows the total spread of your weapon. The inner circle is where most of the shots will land. The math is simple. If an enemy is fully inside the circle, you will hit them 100% of the time. No missing a shot at point blank range just because you got unlucky.
Kill confirmed, right?
At first, I assumed this thing was just a gimmick. I figured I'd use it once in a while, but most of the time we'll just be mindlessly clicking the fire button, like in every other game. I even wrote that assumption down in my notes for this video. But I was completely wrong. I ended up manually aiming almost every single shot I took. It genuinely surprised me just how absolutely vital this mechanic becomes. It gets deeper, because working in tandem with free aim is a body part targeting. If you aim at something specific, you damage that specific part. You can disable an enemy's arm to stop them from shooting back. You can blow out a leg to stop them from rushing you. This is also how you bypass armor. Who cares if an enemy has a bulletproof chestplate if I can just shoot them in the soft bits? It is intuitive, understandable, and deeply tactical. This all fits into the cover system. Since the game simulates the actual bullet pass, cover isn't just a magical buff that decreases the chance you get hit. It is something that, actually covers you from bullets, a physical geometry. If the game says a tree provides full cover, but your soldier is sticking out from behind it, you are an easy target. The rule is simple. If I can see your toe, I can shoot your toe. Another quite revolutionary addition is the vehicles. This is a whole new kind of unit. You can deploy actual APCs that function as mobile cover and heavy artillery. They don't get injured, they don't panic, and they can plow straight through scenery like a battering ram. It is a total game changer. We also have to talk about evolving enemies. Since the Pandorans are literally unstable mutants, they don't stay the same. They constantly evolve and mutate based on how the war is going. They grow thicker chitin, they get stronger, they get bigger. It is a brilliant way to naturally ramp up the difficulty as the campaign goes on. And last but not least, I must mention the quality of life godsend. The single best feature in the entire genre. You do not need to watch crabmen shamble across the map for 5 minutes every turn. You can ramp the speed up and watch them zoom. Does it look goofy as hell? Yes. Do I frankly care? Absolutely not. Thank you, developers, for respecting my time. But I digress. As you can see, on the ground, the combat is serious, strategic and tactical. And if we zoom out to the strategic layer, the game maintains that same obsessive focus on simulation. The scale of our operation is enormous, though we start small. One base, one ship and a handful of scared soldiers. It feels appropriately lonely for the end of the world. We fly around the globe scanning points of interest, and it triggers that weird loot box kind of dopamine hit. Will I get resources, a weird event, a new mission? Uncovering the map feels genuinely satisfying. And as we play, the Phoenix project expands. We reactivate old bases, recruit dozens of soldiers and build entire fleets of aircrafts. And we need to manage all of that. You don't just click upgrade weapon and magically everyone gets a laser rifle. No, you have to manufacture every individual gun, every single magazine of ammo, every grenade, every piece of armor for every single soldier in your army. And this feels immersive. You feel like a true commander, a logistician running a complex organization with a real global footprint. And this is where the dream dies. Because while PhoenixPoint succeeds at having all these revolutionary mechanics and deep simulation, it fails at being a fun video game. All these ideas only sound so entertaining, but when you actually play... Now, let's take those dreams of revolutionary mechanics and tear them down, one by one. Let's start with the scale. Remember how cool I said it was to have a global operation? The reality is that it turns the game into a micromanagement hell. I wasn't kidding when I said you have to manually manufacture every single magazine, helmet and medkit for dozens of soldiers across multiple bases. And you have to do this through a user interface that feels like it was designed in 1995. I get that you were inspired by the original XCOM, Julian, but come on. Do you want to compare two weapons? You can't. There is no easy side-by-side comparison. You have to memorize the stats of one, back out of the menu, find the other, and compare them in your head. I literally had to sit there with a physical notebook and a pen just to play this modern, futuristic sci-fi game. This drudgery leads directly to the clone trooper problem. Because you have so many soldiers to manage, they stop being people. They become assets. There is nothing to make them feel unique. Almost zero customization outside of changing their armor color. It doesn't help that there are very few basic classes, and each one has a single linear skill tree. There is zero variability. Sure, you can dual class later, but the combinations usually feel awkward or redundant. You end up with an army of soldiers that all play exactly the same. They have no personality, there's no stat tracking for kills or accuracy to make them stand out either. Nada. In PhoenixPoint, if a soldier dies, I am not sad because I lost a hero. I am just annoyed that I have to craft a new pair of pants. And that's bad. That's not what I want from my XCOM likes. But surely the combat holds up. I mean, what about that revolutionary aiming system that I hyped up earlier? Well, the free aim system isn't perfect. Sometimes the circle tells you a shot is clear, but the bullet hits the invisible hitbox of a crate or something. Other times you have a perfect visual line of sight, but the game insists you are staring at a wall. And that cool strategic body part system, it is often completely useless. You would think shooting a human in the face would, I don't know, do something? Blind them, concuss them, maybe just kill them because they have no brain anymore. No, they just take a generic chunk of damage and keep fighting. It is exactly the same as just shooting them in the torso. There is no critical hit system whatsoever. Flanking an enemy gives you 0 bonus damage. Walking up to point blank range with shotgun gives you 0 bonus damage. It feels wrong. It feels like the game refuses to reward you for playing risky. With a mechanic like free aim, there should be weak points. Some kind of small glowing red spots where enemies are especially vulnerable. But there just aren't. And the vehicles? Oh god, the vehicles! The idea is awesome. The implementation is a disaster. The maps are simply not designed for big 2x2 units. They get constantly stuck on geometry, making them completely useless. How do you add a whole unit type to the game and not check if it can actually function on the map? And I didn't even mention the balancing. A vehicle takes up 3 soldier slots. So, your choice is 3 flexible soldiers who can level up and learn skills, or 1 vehicle that can't level up, can't reload, and gets stuck on a rock at the start of the mission. Oh, and by the way, the enemy's big units also constantly get stuck and pace back and forth because the maps clearly weren't designed for them either. Did anyone actually playtest this? Speaking of the maps, the design overall is boring and extremely repetitive. This is especially bad on dedicated missions like the Pandoran layer. Every single one of those missions is just a series of identical, narrow, dark corridors. 0 variability. But the worst part is, the absolute worst part, is how the game handles difficulty. The difficulty curve isn't a curve, it's an infinite cliff. The game starts off confusing, with barely any explanation of what you should be doing or what constitutes a good move versus a bad one. The tutorials are so bare bones that I honestly think the confusion might be by design. When you finally do start understanding things, the game becomes trivially easy for a few hours. Then it starts ramping up. New types of enemies appear and older ones get stronger. That is logical and expected. But then it keeps ramping up. And keeps ramping up. And still ramping up. I am genuinely not sure if it ever stops. I understand the narrative goal here. It's supposed to show that the Pandorans are winning and your doomsday clock is ticking. On paper it sounds immersive and cool, but in practice, a lot of late game missions just feel impossible. No matter how flawlessly you play, there are simply too many enemies in superior positions. Let me tell you, it is not fun to fly halfway across the globe, deploy your squad, look at the enemies, realize it is completely unwinnable, and immediately climb right back into the dropship. This misery is driven by three specific anti-fun mechanics: will points, corruption, and enemy design. Let's start with will points. In this game, your primary combat resource for using cool abilities is the exact same resource that prevents your soldiers from panicking. Will points. Want to do a long dash? That costs will. Want to unleash a massive burst of bullets? That costs will. So, let me get this straight. Engaging with the most fun parts of the game actively makes your soldiers depressed. Why? Why would using a jetpack cause a highly trained operative to have a mental breakdown? Having a system where using your class abilities is actively detrimental to your squad is baffling game design to me. It just discourages you from doing anything cool. And to rub salt in the wound, one of the DLCs introduces corruption. Over time, your soldiers get infected, providing them with a tiny buff, but a massive drawback: it slowly drains their maximum will points. Well, great! Now you have soldiers dropping into a hot zone with already crippled willpower, losing even more will if they do anything other than shoot a basic gun. And finally panicking because a crab monster looked at them funny. What a brilliant idea! To make matters worse, because of course they are even worse, corruption appears very early in the campaign. There is almost zero explanation of what it is, and you have literally no means of dealing with it until much later in the game. On paper, having your soldiers slowly corrupted by an eldritch virus sounds wonderfully Lovecraftian. In reality, it just makes the game miserable to play. Calling it bad design is an understatement. I've also brought up bad enemy design. Now, to be fair, for the most part, the enemy design is actually pretty decent. Nothing groundbreaking, but not glaringly awful either. Except for a few spectacular exceptions. The biggest offender being the Acheron. Acheron? Acheron? I have no idea, let's say Acheron. This is a massive bullet sponge of a unit that doesn't do much damage. Instead, it's a support unit. It buffs other Pandorans, gives them armor, debuffs your forces, spreads corruption, and worst of all, it summons reinforcements. So now let me paint you a picture of the quintessential PhoenixPoint experience. You drop into a mission, the Acheron spawns on the exact opposite side of the map, safely hidden behind 3 buildings. By the time your squad has physically walked far enough to even see him, he has already summoned 10 highly evolved, incredibly dangerous mutants. Meanwhile, your own soldiers are already on the verge of a panic attack just from existing. Does that sound fun to you? Because that is exactly what most late game missions look like. At a certain point, a switch simply flips. The game goes from "every single mission is a breeze, what am I doing here?" straight to "every single mission seems unwinnable, and I can't do anything, what am I doing here?" But what makes this truly terrible is that whether a mission is beatable is decided entirely by a dice roll. Spawn locations are completely random. Will the Acheron spawn on the other side of the map and endlessly summon an army uncontested? Or will it spawn right on top of your squad so you can blow it away in turn 1 before it even gets to move? Let's roll the dice and find out! Oh, you got unlucky. The mission is unbeatable. Sorry. Wanna try again? Because you can. Every time you press the restart mission button, the map seed rerolls. So if the game hands you a stupidly unwinnable scenario, the strategy is to just keep flipping a coin until it hands you a beatable one. Wow! Masterful game design right there. I could go on. There's so much more I could tear into. I could talk about the air combat minigame, which sounds amazing, right? Fighter jets, dogfighting, mutated flying horrors. But in reality, it plays like a cheap mobile game. I could talk about the clunky dual-class leveling system more. But honestly, I'm tired. It's all the same problem, I'm just repeating myself at this point. It's a brilliant idea that sounds incredibly intriguing on paper, implemented so poorly that it actively drains the fun out of the room. And that is 90% of PhoenixPoint. I genuinely tried to love this game, but by the end, I was just miserable. The late game is the absolute epitome of unfun. PhoenixPoint is a museum of revolutionary ideas, put together by people who, I genuinely suspect, never actually sat down to play their own game. So that was it. I was done. I was ready to uninstall, write this script about how disappointing it was, and move on. But PhoenixPoint has a weird history. After the developers released the game and all the DLCs, they decided that it is finished. In summer 2022, they released the complete edition, added Steam Workshop support, and moved on to their next project, Frosthaven. They left the game just as it was, with all the flaws. But then something strange happened. Just as I started working on this video, a massive free update dropped, the Firebird update. It fixed bugs, added quality of life features, and tweaked the balance. And in the patch notes, the developers did something you rarely see. They openly talked about the overhaul mod, how great it is, and that they worked on this update in tandem with the developers of the mod. And in the end, they explicitly recommend to play with that mod called Terror from the Void. Terror from the Void is a passion project by a team who refused to let the game die. They continued working on it and improving after the developers stopped in 2022. It has a lot of promises of making the game better and fixing a lot of issues I had with it. So I've looked at all of that, and against my better judgment, I've decided to give it a second chance. I installed the Firebird update. I installed Terror from the Void. And I started a new campaign. Because I just couldn't in good faith make this video without playing this new ultimate version of PhoenixPoint. So, was it worth it? Does this massive community overhaul actually make the game good? Well, it helps. Overall, the game just feels better. The new quality of life additions are awesome, and the UI finally doesn't feel like you've actively fighting it at every step. They also completely overhauled the class system, which is a massive relief because the vanilla skill trees were about as engaging as reading a phone book. Then there's the enormous new Delirium system, which is a total rework of that awful corruption mechanic I hated so much. Is it entirely fixed? No, your soldiers still lose will points from getting Delirium, but now keeping them well rested actually kind of counteracts it. It takes a miserable "screw you, you lose" mechanic and turns it into a genuine "manage your resources" mechanic. It feels more thought out and, crucially, fair. Remember earlier when I said the Chaos Marketplace was completely useless? No? You don't remember? Oh, that's because it was so useless, I didn't even bother mentioning it. But in the mod, it actually matters. You can buy guns, vehicles, mercenaries, and even restricted research from other factions. It gives you a tangible reason to engage a lot more with the world's economy. They've also added some much needed enemy variety. When you're fighting human factions, they now deploy captains, mini-bosses that provide buffs to their squad. Meanwhile, Pandorans can spawn as touched by the void, giving them nasty special abilities. It's nothing completely revolutionary, but it adds some spice to the encounters and helps break up the monotony of the late game. Finally, there's the complete rework of the aircraft system, and it is better. My absolute favorite part was getting a blimp. With the right upgrades in this mod, that thing holds 12 slots. For my squad, that meant having a massive roster of 9 heavily armored soldiers and the whole as tank. It essentially turned into a floating fortress, where my team just lived in the sky. We would float around the globe for weeks, descend from the clouds to wipe out some aliens, and then drift away to patch our wounds in the upper atmosphere. Actually, fun. So, does all of this mean PhoenixPoint is finally good? If you are going to play this game, you must play it with Terror from the Void mod. It is the true Ultimate Edition. It adds the nuance, the balance, and the genuine care that the original developers couldn't quite deliver. But it is still PhoenixPoint. The mod is a band-aid on a broken leg. Maybe there's less bleeding, but the bone is still completely shattered. The late game is still an absolute slog. The Acheron still spawns on the other side of the map and endlessly calls in reinforcements. The map design is still just as bland, and 2x2 units will still constantly get stuck. Your spawn location is still decided by a dice roll. Managing 6 bases and 50 identical soldiers is still a micromanagement hellscape. And yes, the UI is still very rigid. The mod makes the game more playable. It makes it less frustrating and a bit more fun. but it cannot fix the fundamental flaws buried deep in the game's foundation. So, in the end, I really wanted to like PhoenixPoint. Like, really wanted to. I gave it 2 completely separate chances. I spent dozens of hours forcing myself to play it, just hoping it would finally click. I did that because there is some genuinely brilliant stuff here. Mechanics I desperately want to see in other games. The free aim system is such a masterful piece of design, and I prefer it so much more to just praying to dumb dice rolls. But I keep coming back to the same thought. It feels like they didn't actually play their own game. They just brainstormed cool ideas and threw them into a blender. I get why they decided to make this game. I get what they wanted to do. I can clearly see the vision and the ambition. But oh my god, did I not enjoy myself. Because it turns out that the game is a lot more than just a bunch of great ideas thrown together. And now, remembering the massive scandal around the game's launch, when they sold out for the Epic Games Store exclusivity money, kind of solidifies this whole feeling. It makes you wonder if they ever actually wanted to make a fun, polished game, or if they just wanted to sell a really great concept of a game.
So, just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
I am sure there is more to PhoenixPoint. I am sure I missed some side content. I definitely didn't do all the possible endings, but this time I just couldn't do it. PhoenixPoint is a revolutionary tactical squad shooter, but only on paper. Thanks for watching, guys, no long outro this time. Just remember to be a good cream puff, drop a like and subscribe. Hope to see you in the next one, and here's a kitty.